I would like to welcome James Farlaud from the University of Tasmania and the School of Natural Sciences, who will talk about the fires in Tasmania. So, James.
Hello, everybody. So we just had the opportunity to see all these presentations on this huge global fire problem. Massive fires that have occurred recently in big, heavily populated areas. Lots of people are affected. So I'm going to go to the opposite end of this extreme, and talk about fires in a tiny little island in Australia that's mostly wilderness, doesn't have a lot of people, but I think is really interesting because it's one of the world's most unique flammable ecosystems on an island scale. So I'm just going to give you a quick background on Tasmania. It's an island south of about 600 kilometers south of Victoria in the southeast of Australia, and it's an incredibly diverse landscape. So it's a very temperate, flammable landscape, but I just give two maps here. Well, it's not working. But anyway, so on the left, that's basically the top topography of Tasmania. On the right is the vegetation. Don't try to read what these vegetation are, but I just want to give the idea that it's really topographically diverse, very mountainous, very rugged, and that results in a big diversity of vegetation, with everything ranging from very flammable forests and sedgelands. These sedgelands have often meters of peat beneath them, so they're really unique flammable landscapes, as well as vegetation such as rainforests and alpine scrub, which are extremely fire sensitive. And then really unique vegetation, which is what I'm interested specifically here, which is wet eucalyptus forests, which have combinations of non-flammable and highly flammable vegetation and create really interesting fire problems. It's a little bit of a background about what I'm interested in. I'm really interested in kind of combining fire modeling and fuel management. And more broadly, I'm really interested in connecting kind of on-the-ground, field-based knowledge of ecology and scaling that up using well-applied modeling, mathematical and statistical modeling techniques. So for my first project, when I started my PhD, I was able to jump on this project that the Tasmania Fire Service had initiated to attempt to develop an actual probabilistic measurement of risk reduction associated with different prescribed burning plans. So we simulated wildfires across Tasmania. We saturated the state with 10,000 ignitions and basically burned the entire state using fire behavior models. And it was able to give us a geographic analysis of fire behavior across Tasmania. So this is Tasmania burning as it is now, with red areas having really high fire intensities, sometimes simulate up to almost 200,000 kilowatts per meter, but that was with a model, so that's going to be not very accurate at best. But anyway, so we were able to then simulate prescribed burning in this landscape and redo this analysis. So we initially simulated burning a third of the state, basically performing prescribed burning on all vegetation that could handle it, and found that if you burn 30% of a landscape, you can reduce the impact of wildfires. So we redid this analysis and found that there was a huge reduction in wildfire activity. But that's burning 30% of the state. So it gives a scale of the kind of, gives a sense of the kind of scale you'd need to perform prescribed burning at to get major reductions. When we looked at so we simulated 61 other prescribed burning regimes or scenarios, more ranging between 1% and 5% of the state, we found we had that had a much more minimal effect on wildfire behavior. So this is just for 5 different vegetation types. An area treated on the x-axis, an area burnt in wildfires on the y-axis. And you can see the effect is essentially negligible. So across this simulation essentially told us that across a large scale, you can't really have a large impact on wildfire activity through prescribed burning. You have to treat a landscape very intensively to affect wildfire. Another interesting insight that we gained from that last study was that these wet eucalypt forests I was telling you about were exhibiting simulated fire intensities of up to 200,000 kilowatts per meter. So either this ecosystem is just extremely globally unique, or the models might be slightly overestimating this fire intensity. So anyway, this is what I'm doing with the rest of my PhD, is looking into these ecosystems that are really globally unique, because you have basically 3 levels to this forest, and they're varying flammability. So the understory is composed mostly of dead eucalyptus litter, is highly flammable, as is the overstory eucalyptus canopy, because, as mentioned, eucalyptus are very fire adapted, very flammable. But in between that overstory and that understory, you have a much less flammable layer of rainforest trees and shrubs. And so I've really gotten interested in, rather than most fire models look at the horizontal spread of fire, look at the intensity, I've been really interested in modeling the vertical spread of fires in this forest. So modeling that transition from a surface fire to crown fire, which is a fairly simple task comparatively when it comes to coniferous forests. But because we have such a complex structure of fuels with such varying flammabilities, that is much more complicated in these forests. So this was our first attempt we have on the right, which is in a paper we have under review right now. It's a somewhat complicated plot, but essentially the red and orange boxes are simulated flame heights across 90th percentile and above fire weather days in different regions across Australia. This was based off of actual fuel loads we measured in the field across the continent. And the main take-home message and the green boxes behind are the heights to the crown of the forest. So basically, you're looking at that overlap of the flame heights and the crown and the heights to crown base. And the idea was that's going to try to give us some kind of probabilistic distribution of fire severity in these forests. So this is essentially, looking at this, the key message was with the red boxes, we burned the understory layer. With the red boxes, we had a combined flame heights simulated from the combustion of the combined fuel loads in the live understory and the surface fuels. Whereas with the orange boxes, it was just to the simulation of the combustion of the surface fuels. So if you could see, the dangerous fires you have in terms of fires reaching the crown of these forests occurs when that understory burns. So basically, the removal of that understory, that's the key layer in the transition of these fires from surface to the crown. So I think that's the key message here, is underscoring the importance of fuel management and in this case of hopefully removal of that understory in areas where you do want to manage for fire, manage fuels in a way for fire to prevent fires from becoming severe. So that's kind of what I've been working on. But I think we've also kind of identified some big challenges with some of this work we've done. So that approach I just took was basically simulating flame heights using the fire behavior models that exist. But as many speakers have mentioned already, those fire behavior models are pretty poor. So I used the MacArthur model in this case, which is the standard fire behavior model in Australia. And so this plot here is basically similar to what I just showed you. The green boxes are the canopy heights in 4 of those plots. And this is 4 specific plots in the study I just showed you, where we measured the fuel loads. And those red and yellow dots are actual simulated flame heights, simulated the same way I just showed you. But in these 4 plots, they actually experienced fires after we measured them. And when we looked at the scar heights on the trees, so the black boxes of the actual char heights on the trees, we found out these models were massively over-predicting flame heights in these forests. So this just shows how that these models are quite poorly adapted to wet forests. So that's something that I think we really need to do better, is be able to model fire behavior in complex forests. Also, in Australia, we're really data poor. We have lots of vegetation, lots of space, not a lot of people. So we don't have a lot of data on fires, and field data is very expensive to collect. Now, me and my supervisor were very lucky in the past few days to get a tour of the landscapes around Barcelona. And that was one thing that was very striking, was the difference between here and in Australia. Is there's actually a fair amount of data because we live in such, or we're in such a densely populated landscape with such a long history. So, for instance, this is a village we visited up near Tarragona 2 days ago, and this is the current fuel situation there with the this is the aerial photo of the current situation, and you can go back 50 years and see how much more agricultural activity there was, how much more fuel modification there was, and I think there's some really interesting opportunities for collaboration here, because we could rerun. Having this much fuels data, especially historical fuels data, could allow us to rerun some of those simulation experiments, like the one I showed you across Tasmania, and get an idea of what the probabilistic reduction in fires, increase in fires has been over the past 50 years, resulting from the abandonment of land in Europe. I think, and those kind of numbers are very valuable to policymakers when you can tell a policymaker, well, the risk of this village being burned in a wildfire has increased by X%. They listen to that. Also, we noticed some interesting similarities in some of the landscapes here to what we were looking at back there. So David mentioned green fire breaks. And so this picture on the left is a green fire break in wet eucalypt forest in Victoria. So these are really tall forests, but this isn't a thought that an idea we've been trying to push a lot in Hobart. And I think it's interesting that when we came here and see some of the cork oaks where some of this silvopastoral kind of management of the land has been reintroduced. And it's just really interesting to see the similarities between these two landscapes. So I think despite having very different ecologies, and I think there's some really interesting opportunities and similarities between the European fire problem and the Australian fire problem. And yeah, that's about it. Thank you.